Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Hassan, and I'm absolutely honored and delighted to have my mentor for my doctoral program, Dr. Judy Stevens-Long, here with me today on the Influence Continuum. Before we get started, Judy, I want to just read a little background on you, if I may. You are a Ph.D. faculty emerita at Fielding Graduate University, where you served as Associate Dean for Curriculum Development from 2001 to 2008. And from 1996 to 2000, Judy, you developed and directed the first online degree program in the country, the MA in Organizational Development and Effectiveness at Fielding. Judy's also emerita from Cal State Los Angeles, where she focused on adult development and published the first edition of Adult Life, Developmental Processes, and 4 subsequent editions. Her research publications range from works on child development to work on death and dying. In fact, she's the author of Living Well, Dying Well, a guide to choices, costs, and consequences with co-author Dohrea Bardell. She is currently editing the International Handbook of Adult Development and Wisdom for Oxford University Press and is currently working with Hospice of Santa Barbara as a death educator and patient service volunteer. Uh, Judy, you and I were connected through Michael Commons, who
Right.
talked me into getting the doctorate and said, go to Fielding, I'll supervise your research. And he connected me to you, and you were actually about to retire, but
Right.
you took me on. Thank you, and said, I'll see you to the end, Steve.
Let's do this.
Let's do this. And I'm getting such incredibly positive feedback, Judy, from the doctoral dissertation work on undue influence and the authoritarian, um, the model, start over, the bite model of authoritarian control. Just writing down the numbers. So, Judy, your book, which is, for those able to look at the video, is behind you, Living Well, Dying Well. And as an expert in developmental psychology, this is a very topical moment because so many people are experiencing death anxiety, the war in Ukraine, threats from Putin, and nuclear, you know.
Not to not just not to mention it, but we just got over COVID,
Right.
where everybody was really thinking a lot about their own mortality. So
Yeah, and I
I
just
think that
got COVID after a booster and
right.
everything else. So I'm warning everyone over 65, don't be too cocky and wear a mask in public, indoor spaces
Absolutely. Yeah.
till we're done with this, hopefully. So there's so much I want to share with our audience, but I think what I'd like to do first, if I may, is explain to our audience, lay people, what is developmental psychology and why is it important?
Well, developmental psychology is focused on positive development. It talks about physical, emotional, and behavioral changes over the lifespan. And my particular interest has been in adult development, which, when I tell that to people who don't know much about psychology, they always say, well, what's adult development? Like, adults develop? Well, that's a surprise. And so there's a lot of development in adulthood and a lot of widening of our perspective, being able to understand other people's perspectives better, and being able to see the system that engages us all. So
Right.
there's a terrific amount of very important development in adulthood.
Yeah, and I believe you published with Dr. Michael Commons,
Right.
some work
We've
together.
published a couple of things. We published the fourth edition of Adult Life together.
Uh-huh.
He wrote the chapters on cognitive development. Cognitive development is the same thing as saying intellectual development,
Uh-huh.
developmental logic and reasoning. And that's Michael's bailiwick. So,
Yeah. And I want to just take advantage of the fact that you and he know each other and know each other's work so well, and say that he recently presented at the program in psychiatry and the law, where you kindly came and presented as well at Harvard Medical School. Was talking about his models, and we were discussing about how when I got in the Moonies, my stage went down. My
yes, yes.
my ability to hold multiple worldviews simultaneously and keep my own at the same time went out the window, and I was thinking like a child,
Exactly.
black and
Yes,
white, all or nothing, good versus
right.
evil. And just that was such a profound connecting the dots between his work, your work, and my work, and just
Yeah,
trying to think about how we can de-radicalize, millions of people who are still believing in lies or thinking Putin
yeah.
is a
Well,
nice person.
taking on QAnon is a big event as well,
Yep,
you
we did
know.
that too.
Hmm.
Exactly. And so, I teach now with my influence continuum how important it is to do developmentally appropriate parenting. And so many cults treat young people like they're adults and expect
Yes,
them to sit for hours and not fidget, and they get hit with rods or sticks or belts, with corporal punishment. How awful is that? Could you
yeah.
say a few words on, just developmentally appropriate parenting and why it's important for parents to be sensitive to the difference?
Yeah. Well, first of all, in a lot of states, actually, physical punishment is against the law, which is an interesting thing that happens because
Yes.
uh, there are a lot of ethnic differences in how people treat children, and many ethnic groups do still use corporal punishment. And we're trying to discourage that. The most effective kind of parenting is what we call authoritative parenting. That is, setting boundaries and keeping them, and making sure that the kids are organized, making sure that they understand what your values are and what kind of behavior is expected of them, keeping those standards pretty high, because when you set high standards for children, they tend to live up to them. So
Right.
an authoritative parent also, however, shows a great deal of love for the kid. And often said, if you truly love a child and the child knows that, there's not a whole lot of things that you can do that are wrong, or that you will do that are wrong. So the other part is also to trust yourself as a parent
Mm.
and to educate yourself, of course, but also not to get involved in some of the movements that are just sort of borderline crazy, like the
Or
one where,
crazy.
yeah, yeah, like the one where you can't let your grandparents touch the kids. Now, there may be a reason for that that people have in their own history, but that really denies the child the source of comfort and love and support that they may need later on. My son-in-law died when he was 46,
I'm
leaving a
sorry.
6-year-old and a 10-year-old. And I took a much greater role in their lives after that. Myself and my husband really filled the gap for her. And
Sure.
I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. And of course, it is again about death and dying as
It
well.
is. We're going to get into your book in one more second, but I just want to highlight that you were talking about authoritative parenting is healthy, but
Right.
authoritarian
Tarian
parenting is
parenting is
not
not.
healthy.
Yes, that's right.
And the
Authoritative
authoritarian,
parents,
right.
authoritative parents have the ego strength to be able to listen to their kids' desires and allow their kids to negotiate a bit. But when the decision is made, be committed to that, be consistent, and be authoritative in your setting of those boundaries. Make sure that there's a few boundaries, especially with adolescents, not too many,
Right.
but a couple of things like don't do things where you might die. That's important.
Yep.
uh,
Safety. Hmm.
Safety comes first.
Yep.
And also in adolescence, there's a trade-off between responsibility, the child taking responsibility for themselves, and freedom. And so you're in charge of making sure that that's the right balance, that they have challenge in their life, but they also have boundaries. Because if you don't set them, probably the police will. So you don't really want, police are very, very attentive to adolescents. So
Yeah.
you want to keep your kids, part of your job is just to keep your kids out of jail and alive during adolescence.
Yeah. Well, thanks. So far I've succeeded in
So
my
far, so good,
19-year-old.
right?
Yeah, knock on wood. So, your book, I loved your book.
Thank
And
you.
I really want to, have a wider readership for your book, and that's why I asked you to come on and talk about it with us today. So, the title is Living Well, Dying Well, and the focus is the top is living well. So share with us some of the key takeaways that people should know about, and hopefully will motivate them to buy it and read it.
Yes. Well, I certainly welcome people to my website, which is Dying with Wisdom.
Okay.
And there are a bunch of articles on there that explore ideas about death and dying that I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure will be interesting to a number of people.
Mm-hmm.
But the book itself is just a very practical guide to what you need to be aware of and what you need to take care of around death and dying.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, Steve, there's a terrific taboo in our culture around talking about death and dying. In fact, I've noticed this, whenever I take it up, whenever I mention
Sure.
it to someone in my circle, even who are used to me and used to what I'm interested in, and I say something more about death, they say, oh gosh, let's not talk about that right now. And I think that's the usual response. I want to talk about it. I want to know all about it, but not right now. Right
Yes.
now, I'm busy. Right now, I'm not thinking about that. Right now, I'm busy. Right now is too soon. Right now is not the right time. So it's really important to consciously set aside a time to take care of business around death and dying, to make sure that other people know what you want, what your position is, what your values are, what's important to you.
Yeah.
Should you be sick? Should you be dying?
Right.
And that other people in your family know that. I think one of the things that I've seen that is so difficult is when people don't write down what they want for themselves when they're dying. And
Right.
then they unexpectedly find themselves dying. And the people around them disagree about what should be happening. So, some of the worst cases that I've seen are these terrible fights that siblings have around what to do with their parents. And if one sibling takes charge and does something that the other siblings don't like, they may not speak again for years. And you
Yeah.
don't want that happening to your kids. You
Right.
don't want that happening to your sisters and brothers.
Right.
So you need to write down what you would want if you were able to make decisions for yourself. And for some reason, whether a terrible accident or an end stage disease, you cannot make decisions for yourself. And you'd be surprised. You think, oh, I could make decisions for myself, but then you're in the hospital and you have a stroke and you can no longer function
Right.
and nobody knows what you want.
Right.
I've been I've been in ICU with people that wouldn't let their spouse or their child go because they couldn't stand to have them die. And that person that was dying was suffering terrifically,
Right.
tremendously in the last few hours of their life. And the person couldn't bring themselves to take the person off of life support.
Ugh.
So it's really important to know whether or not the person that you're helping in the dying part of their life, and I just consider it that way, right?
Yep.
Dying is the dying part of your life, and everybody goes through it, everybody has to deal with it, and you might as well have it work.
Yeah, it's the one certainty is that we're not going to live forever.
That's exactly
And
right.
and and you know, this is one of those things that I think really, as soon as you're in a committed relationship, even if prior to marriage, you should have things in writing, and
Right.
and have a will, have an ethical
Right.
will, spell out the what you do, what you don't want. For me, you know, I want to be an organ donor. You know, I
That's
wanted
an important piece of it.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
so, but a lot of people are like, oh, wait till I'm 60 or I'll wait till I'm 70 and then
Yes, yes.
we'll do it. And what
Right.
your message is, no, do it now.
Yes, and I also think for children, it's really good to sit down with them when they're 16 and they get their license and they have to decide if they want to be an organ donor. That's an excellent time to take them aside and say, look, if you were in a really terrible accident and you were unconscious and you were dying, what would you want me to do? Would you want me to do everything I could to save you? Or would you want me to let you go if you were suffering and they thought you were dying? So I think that just that basic conversation you can have with a kid when they're thinking about something like, you know, whether they want to be an organ donor.
You know, you just, you know, pointed out something to me that I
Yes, I
haven't
thought so.
done with my 19-year-old who's
Yeah,
been driving for a couple of years now.
right.
So thank you for that. But
Yeah, do you know if he's an organ donor?
I don't know.
Well, that'd be a great way to start the conversation. Just say, hey, I never asked you if you were an organ donor. And that just opens up the subject. When
Yep.
a lot of times people have trouble opening up the subject, they really want to, but they don't know how,
Right.
right? So when you're in the movies and you see somebody die in the movies, that's a good time. You say, oh, you know what? That guy dying in the movie reminded me that I don't even know if you want to be buried or cremated or buried at sea. What do you want? And you know, that's an easy way. Most people are not terribly afraid of or intimidated by the question, do you want to be buried or cremated
Right.
when you die? That's a good, easy place to start.
Yep.
The really difficult things come later in the conversation. So you're preparing somebody to go down to more intimidating kinds of questions by asking them that first opening piece. Or if
Hmm.
you're reading a book about death and dying, there's certainly a lot of opportunity to talk about death and dying in an emergency when you're talking about Ukraine, for example.
Yeah. Oh my God. Millions of refugees, so many children who's lost a parent. For that matter, COVID. There's millions of children around the world who've lost at least one parent
That's right.
because of COVID.
COVID. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
And I
share your.
know you know, probably a lot of people thought to themselves, oh, what if I was on a respirator? What would that be like? And then you think to yourself, I wouldn't want to be on it forever. So, where do you draw that line? That's another question that you have to ask yourself about advanced directives. Where do I draw the line? How long am I willing to be on a respirator? And if you go to my website, one of the things that you'll find there is the
Mm,
beginning of a series on advanced directives where I talk about each of the choices, what the pros and cons are of being on a respirator, what's the most reasonable length of time to stay on a respirator.
hmm.
I know that too.
That's
So I've
you're
told
the
my
expert.
husband, I've told my husband he wants me to be on a respirator forever. And I said, no, 3 weeks is a good amount of time because I know that after 3 weeks on a respirator, you start getting brain damage and you have a very, very poor chance of recovery. So I'm
Eh,
78. If I
You
got
look
COVID,
marvelous, my
oh,
dear.
thank you, darling. Looking good is more important than feeling good, as you know.
not.
Billy Crystal, I got to give that one some
Okay.
reference. Um, but if you are on a respirator and you stay on the respirator more than 3 weeks, you have a very good chance of never recovering completely.
Yep.
This is also true with CPR. And there are very important questions about whether you want to be on feeding tube, whether you want to be on hydration, whether you want to be intubated. All of these questions you really ought to take a look at, because I don't think we have a very realistic ideas of what it's like to be dying, what it's like to be dying at home, or what it's like to be dying in a hospital. And
Right.
the truth is, in a hospital, they'll do everything they can to save you.
Right.
And you don't want that a lot of times. You don't want to be revived when you're dead.
Yeah, I'm a quality of life guy. I don't want
Right,
to be
exactly.
alive if I'm not, if my brain isn't working well or if I'm not able
Right.
to contribute to society. I don't want to be a drain to my family and friends. I don't want to drain our financial resources either, that I'd rather pass on to younger people who can use it better, than me.
Especially if you're dying anyway. I mean, the
Right.
whole premise of advanced directives, of telling people what you want when you die,
Yep.
is that these go into effect when you are dying.
Right.
They told you that you're terminal. They've given you a few
Right.
weeks or a few months or whatever. And secondly, you can't make decisions for yourself, which means you're unconscious.
Right.
So remember, when you're thinking about it, that this is something that happens in extreme unction. It's not something that you just call into account whenever you go to the hospital. Of course, you
Yep.
want to have them on file at the hospital,
Yes,
but
exactly. Give them.
nobody's going to ask you these questions unless you are terminal and you can't make decisions for yourself.
Yeah,
So
it's a double bind in terms of that. Um, so many questions are coming into my head, and there's so much ground I would like to cover. Um, I guess I want to first, just dive a little bit more into you suffered the loss of your son-in-law. I believe he had a long-standing medical, was it cancer?
he had glioblastoma, which is a very aggressive form of brain cancer.
Right.
And he lived for a year after his diagnosis. He was told he had 18 months. So it was a little shorter than we expected,
Yeah.
but we were pretty well prepared. And he died at home. And that was
Yep.
the first time I had seen somebody die at home. And there's a big, big movement now. And practically everybody I know wants to die at home. So you have to think about what that means. And
Right.
having been through it myself, I can say it's a double edged sword. It's
Yeah.
both extremely comforting for the person who's dying and for the person who's attending,
Yeah.
to be at home and to have hospice care that handles the medications and so forth. And, when you have hospice care at home, they only come a couple of times a week for an hour. It's not really
I see.
help. So you have to be prepared to hire help, because you're not going to be able to do it 24 hours a day, and
Uh-huh.
to call in all your resources around your family to help you, because they're going to need to. It's very tiring to be taking care of someone who's dying.
Yes.
Never mind that everybody wants to visit them,
Uh-huh.
right? So my daughter is baking cookies and making coffee and tea and making sure that her guests get something to eat and drink. And they go in and they talk to him. She has to make sure that he's going to be awake. So she's got to time the medications and so forth so that he
Mm-hmm.
can be there for them.
Yep.
And then the hardest part of all was, people are usually very upbeat when they're talking to somebody who's dying. Well, things are going to be okay, which of course doesn't make any sense at all.
Right.
And, wish you the best of luck. Maybe you'll
Awful.
get better, all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And then when they leave, when they're walking out the door, they fall apart. And the person who's taking care of the dying person then has to handle their grief as well as their own grief.
Right.
And so it gets really, people think it's easy, but it's not easy. Very difficult.
It's not
Very
easy.
difficult.
So please tell us, like, what are the appropriate communications if you're visiting someone who has a prognosis to live for 6 more months you're visiting. One thing I was told not to say how you doing or how you feeling, but to say how are you feeling today,
Yes.
you
How are
know?
you feeling now?
Yeah.
How are you feeling now? Are you doing good today? What's going on? Then you can ask questions like who's been to visit you? What have they been doing?
Mm-hmm.
How are the kids doing?
Right.
How's your spouse doing?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember the time that we did blah blah? So that I think what people don't realize is that they can remind them about their life. The most important thing you can do for a dying person is to tell them again what you know about their life. And
Yes.
so you say, do you remember when you and I went to San Diego together and we went to see the whale and the whale splashed all over you? Do you remember that? That was so funny. I'll never forget that. I wonder, how did you feel about that whale splashing all over you? Or did anything like that ever happen to you again? Or had that happened to you before? So the stories that you know about their life, revisit those stories.
Sure.
You have a special memory of them that nobody else has,
Yeah.
and it can add something to their understanding of their life. And the Buddhists, for example, believe that after you die, you spend a certain amount of time in a place called the Bardo. You may be familiar with that because of Lincoln in the Bardo, which is a very popular novel at one
Mm.
point a couple of years ago. But the Bardo is just the place between lives. And there's a lot of rules about the Bardo. But the most important thing is that you have to remember your own life, what your life was about. What were your successes? What would you like to do better next time? They believe there is a next time.
Uh-huh.
And so those are the things that are good to think about, not just when you're dead, but
Right.
also when you're dying. That's part of the preparation. I often recommend that people who know that they are dying
Mm-hmm.
put together a box of mementos. It could be letters, it could be articles in your case, it could be books in your
My
case.
articles, they're boxes of
I know.
I don't
It
want to
could be your special article, the one that you like the best.
I like
It could
that
be,
better.
yeah, your special book. It should
Right?
be very special because this is all going to fit in one box, right? Not a
Yeah.
big box. It's called a oh gosh, I'm skipping the name now. But anyway, I got a satin hat box.
Okay.
And so it's about a box about this big and
Yeah.
about this big. And I put in there all the letters that I'd like to have read to me again, all the photos that I'd like to go through again, all the ideas that I had myself, maybe some of the poems I've written or short stories, and have those read to me while I'm dying.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can if you find out that you are dying and you can put together something like that and give it to the people that visit you and have them go through those things with you and find out what part they played in those things. Maybe they had a big part, maybe they had no part, maybe they knew about it, maybe they didn't. It
Yep.
gives you something to talk with them about. And even when people are completely incommunicative,
Yep.
toward the end, you can keep reading those things and talking about those things to them. So actually, it makes it really easy to talk
Yeah.
to a dying person.
Yeah. It's so important. And I saw I think it was a 60 Minutes about Tony Bennett going to Radio City Music Hall with I think Lady Gaga, and he has dementia, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he
Yep.
remembers the music.
He
He
remembers how to sing.
remembers the
Mm-hmm.
words to the
Mm-hmm.
songs, and he could belt them out. And
Right.
Yeah, I think it was 95 or something, and
Yeah,
standing room only, it claps, and it was
yeah,
so joyous and
yes.
wonderful. But I want to ask you, because he had, was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I believe. So what about if you become aware that a loved one is developing dementia? What
Yeah.
then?
Well, there's a whole bunch of things you can do. You definitely want to keep reminding them of their life, of who you are, who everyone around them is,
Hmm.
what they've done in their life, what their ambitions were and their goals, what their successes were, maybe even a little bit about what they worried about,
Hmm.
those kinds of things. You can make a tape of their favorite songs. That's a is very, very helpful to people who are Alzheimer's. When you play those songs, often it will prompt a memory or prompt them to communicate with you when they haven't been communicating. So
Yeah.
music is very, very important in people's memories.
Yeah.
Smells are very
Smells
important.
and food, I think, is also because the brain, reacts, right? The
Right,
wired
exactly.
together.
Yes. If you know they have a special that they love the smell of flowers, then that's real easy. You got a lot of flowers, you bring
Sure.
roses, you say, "Do you remember the last time I brought you roses? It was
Yep.
when you were sick with such and such and we were doing this and that, or it was when you graduated from college and we were doing this and that." And then you have sight, you have smell, and you have memory.
Yeah.
And that's really going to pull it together for the person and give them a moment of maybe clarity, maybe give them a moment of illumination. That's what you want to do when somebody is dying. And I'm just telling you the way to do it. You probably have
Sure.
the instinct already that you want to do something that will help them remember.
Sure.
And so you just launch,
Right.
just launch on what you know about their life, what you know about them. Um, Rather than, and when stay in the present when you're talking about their situation at the
Mm-hmm.
moment, be
Mm-hmm.
sure to stay in the present. How are you now? How are people doing now? When I know people that are grieving, about every 2 weeks, I send them a message and I say, how is it now? How are you
Right.
doing now?
Yeah.
And people respond to that really well. Sometimes they write pages about it, but
Right.
it's really important to stay now in the communication about the present
That's
situation.
so valuable. And I also know from my training, you never say, I understand completely what
Oh,
you're
God, no,
going through.
no. Really, you can never understand what another
Right.
person is going through at all. So you can say, well, I was sure scared a lot of the time when I had cancer. It was really hard for me. I think you're doing fabulously. I think you're doing really well around it. How is it affecting you right now?
Right.
You can educate me. That
Right.
is another tack that you can take.
Yep.
You can educate me about death and dying, especially if it's somebody that you admire
Yep.
and somebody that's able to have a good death. So, what is a
Right.
good death? That's a good question,
You're the
right?
author. Tell us.
Right. A good death is a death in which not only the government, first there's the government's definition of a good death. And there's a lot of government publications on death and dying, by the way, that are actually very helpful.
Huh. I didn't know
There's
that.
a huge series of government publications on the conversation. The conversation is a way of referring to talking about advanced directives,
Yeah.
talking about what you want when you die. There's a
Mm-hmm.
very good series on, and all you have to do is look up the conversation and you will find it.
The
Um,
conversation. Okay.
right. And I think that it's extremely important to have that conversation often, not just once.
Right.
But as people grow older, they change their mind about what they want. And when you're 19 and you're dying, you're going to want every single thing done to save you, no matter what, even if it's experimental, you know?
Right.
So that's one thing. When you're 80 and you're dying of cancer or some other in what has become an incurable disease, you're not looking to live forever. You're not looking for everything to be done. You're more likely looking for, okay, if I've been unconscious for a couple weeks and there's no good chance of my coming out of it and I'm not doing particularly well, I am willing to go.
Yeah.
Take me off all that stuff.
Yeah.
And then you have a lot of questions to answer, not just the simple one of, do I want you to let me go? Yeah, I want you to let me go. But do I want to have a feeding tube? Do you want me to have a feeding tube? Do you want me to get hydration? Do you want me to have oxygen? All of those questions need to be answered eventually in a really good advanced directive.
Right.
But there's plenty of forms for doing it. There's plenty of forms that ask you these questions.
And does it cost a lot of money to get the forms?
Oh, no, it's free.
It's
Yeah.
free. So
I
anyone
think there,
listening, don't think that it's expensive. This is just
no,
an investment of your time and
yeah.
energy.
Your hospital will have these forms on file. So, and you want to file them with the hospital anyway, so you might as well get them from the hospital.
Right.
Often they have them online for you to fill out.
Right.
But I think the best one out there is called Five Wishes.
Mm-hmm.
And it costs $5
Mm-hmm.
to download that one. But I will tell you all about it so you don't have to do it. It really starts with you thinking about, what is quality of life to me?
Mm-hmm.
And that seems like a big question, but it's really not, because you're getting down to the bare bones. What are the few activities, one or two activities, which if I could not do that, whatever it is, might be get up and walk around. It might be sit in a chair and watch my favorite TV program. It might be, for me, it's communication. If I can no longer communicate, shoot me in the head, really. I don't think I could stand to live in a world in which I couldn't express myself. Of
Mm,
course, you know, I'm a writer. I do these video
I'm with
things. I do
you.
website. I mean, I'm constantly expressing myself.
Right.
I am my expression.
Right.
For me, it's my expression that is me. So
Yes.
if I couldn't do that anymore, I would definitely want everybody to just let me go.
Yeah.
And I know people get really scared when it comes to something like a feeding tube or hydration. That seems really scary, to sentence a person to starving or being thirsty. But that's not what the experience is like of the dying person.
Right.
It's it actually sometimes makes them more comfortable.
My mom didn't want to drink, and she was at a
Exactly.
care facility in
Exactly.
South Carolina, and they were forcing her to drink, and
Yes.
we had to intervene
Yes.
because they
Often you
weren't.
do have to intervene in the hospital,
Yeah.
because their whole mission is to keep you alive.
Yeah.
And if you die, that is a failure for your doctor and your caretakers.
That's
So
so
they will do
backward.
everything they can to avoid your dying in the hospital.
Wow.
That's why you need to be really clear about what you want and don't want, because
Right.
otherwise you're going to get one whole slew of heroic measures,
Yeah.
because that's what they see as their place in life. And actually, doctors have stronger fear of death than most people.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're dealing with the professionals in a hospital, you're dealing with people who have very high levels of anxiety about death and dying. And you
Uh-huh.
want to choose someone to be your spokesperson, called a healthcare agent,
Yeah.
who is strong and can stand up to healthcare professionals
Right.
and make sure that you get what you want,
Right.
you know.
And isn't it true there's a movement in the United States for compassionate choice, that if you're in pain and suffering and there's no cure, that you can
You can
legally,
choose to die.
you can
Yeah.
choose when you die and
Hmm.
how you die. Could you say
Hmm.
a couple
Now
words
it's
about that?
called take it, you choose to take your own life.
Uh-huh.
It's not called suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in fact, the people who are in charge of that movement get very upset if you call it assisted suicide or physician assisted suicide. It's
Uh-huh.
not suicide,
Right.
it's ending your own life. You
Mm-hmm.
decide to end your own life. It's
Mm-hmm.
very different than suicide.
Right.
Taking you, and you can't, the crazy thing about the movement is we have it in California. You can sign up to be assisted in taking your own life
Mm-hmm.
with the state of California,
Uh-huh.
but you will not be approved if you are depressed. Well, who isn't depressed? Who isn't
Especially
depressed when you're
in,
dying of a terrible disease?
yeah,
Of
that's a,
course you're depressed. So it's very complicated. You can't act depressed
I see.
or test as depressed when you go in to sign up for this thing. So that's just a nutty part of it.
That's so interesting. Judy,
However,
go ahead.
were we
Keep,
getting to the end?
no, no, keep going.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to say that most of the people, the vast majority actually of the people who sign up for assisted dying
Mm-hmm.
don't do it. They never pull the trigger
Mm-hmm.
because in fact, once you know that you can go anytime you feel like it, you can always put it off another day. And
Uh-huh.
that it's just so interesting to me that it allays your anxiety so greatly to know that you can pull the trigger when you need to.
Right. And I'm assuming that you need a medical condition to sign up, or am I
Oh yes,
incorrect?
you have to have
It's not
somebody
just, oh, I
say,
think I'm ready to pull the trigger
yeah,
now.
no.
No, 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 no. We need you
No,
around.
you have to have somebody say that you're dying within the next 6 months.
Got it. That's
And that
really,
6 month thing is really important because you cannot get Medicare won't pay for hospice if you're not within 6 months of dying.
I see.
Um, you can get it extended. For example, if you go to a hospice that is actually a stand up brick and mortar institution
Uh-huh.
where you live while you're dying, then you can get it that 6 month extended over again if you come in with it and you live longer. They're not going to kick you out of a hospice.
Got it.
Right. But it's that 6 month mark is really important.
Yeah, I'm hearing more and more about when people are getting elderly and the kids want to move, sell the house and
Mm-hmm.
whatever, that it really diminishes the person's quality of life because they're so connected to their home or their apartment where they're
Yeah. When
living.
people say that they want to die at home, they don't mean that they want to die in somebody else's home.
Right,
They mean that they want to die in their own home.
right.
And so if that's the case with the person that you're taking care of, it may be extremely difficult to have them live at home because it's much easier for you
Right.
if they live at your house,
Hmm.
rather than their own home.
Right.
If you can arrange, if you have the ability to arrange for care and so on when you're not there, then that's great.
Yep.
But if you don't have it, the most important thing then to do is, let's say you're going to put them in the dining room. Uh, that's where we put Don because he could see my son-in-law because
Right.
he could see out the window
Yep.
and he could see his kids playing in the backyard.
Uh-huh.
So we set him up in the dining room with a hospital thing around him. You
Yep.
can get those stand-up room dividers.
Right.
And then you put their things that are really important to them in that space.
Yes.
Lots of pictures,
Yep.
maybe their favorite chair that you bring
Yep.
to try to create a semblance of their home in the space where they are dying.
Yes.
It's tough, but it's a whole lot better than dying in a hospital for a lot of people.
Yep. So I just want to touch on the many alternatives to traditional burial.
Oh,
I
yes.
know for me, when we first, when you were asked me to read your book and everything else, I started thinking, maybe I'd like to be, have cremated and put in a ball that's put in the ocean that can be a reef for fishes because I
Yes,
scuba dive and I love the ocean.
yes, yes,
So, it got my wheels turning and I contacted one of the companies that did it, but I haven't gone further. But
right.
share with our listeners some options for alternatives these days. What are
Yeah.
people doing?
Well, the options or alternatives for disposition of the body, is what they call it,
Okay.
are growing like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So you can be you can be cremated and put into a piece of jewelry. You can be cremated and planted under a tree. You can be cremated and put in a ball in the ocean to make a reef. You can be cremated, and I want to be cremated and shot out of fireworks over the ocean.
Oh,
You can do that too. You can have green burial, so that's a burial without the coffin and without the liner of the
I have a
grave.
friend who did that with their
Mhm.
mother.
You're allowed to just smolder and go back, dust to dust,
Yeah,
ashes to ashes.
yeah.
You can be you There's a new thing that I really think is interesting that I'm looking forward to.
Uh-huh.
Is you can be frozen, and they freeze you in a glass case, and then they shoot radio waves at the case, and once you're frozen you fall into dust when they shoot these, so it's like being freeze dried.
What? I've
I
never
know.
heard of this.
Yes, you can be freeze
I don't
dried.
know if I like that one.
Shattered.
I like
What?
being shot in fireworks. Like
Fireworks.
that's a celebration to your
Well, I
family and
prefer
friends.
being, this is also stupid because we don't know after we're dead. We don't have
Right,
any idea what,
right.
but I'd rather be frozen than burned. So that's my deal. Um,
Interesting.
yeah.
I
And
hadn't thought
here, because,
about that.
no, here we are so close to the ocean.
Yeah,
And we found out that it's possible to be buried at sea here. So they take you out past the 12-mile limit,
right.
and they bury you at sea where a lot of other people are being buried at sea. And so that also becomes fish food and a reef
Yeah, I
place
like
that could be,
that. That one
yeah,
works for me
that's a
too.
great one. And they don't put you in a coffin or anything like
Right.
that. They just cover you with a canvas bag. You put in a canvas bag that zips up
Yep.
and taken out on a boat and put over the side with all due, ceremony.
Yep.
But
I like that
then you're
idea because then you're fully fish food. All of you are fish food.
exactly. And
And
your loved ones can go out to the ocean and think, oh, daddy's out there getting feeding the fish.
yep.
I think for a lot of people who love the ocean, that's a great alternative.
Yep.
Um, and there's almost nothing you can't do with ashes. My gosh, I mean, ashes are being turned into diamonds and being
Wow.
put in little vials for people to carry around.
Wow.
So,
That's
yeah, there's a
that.
crazy number of alternatives. They're all listed in the book. You can look at them. I've got an article on my website about it, all the
Mm-hmm.
things that you can choose.
Yeah.
It certainly is a growing array, and you must be able to find something that speaks to you.
Yeah, and it's so valuable to talk with you and as a developmental psychologist who's dedicated your life to understanding human psychology, it is such an important part of being human is that we all
Yeah.
die and we all get sick and we suffer losses of people that we care about.
Yeah, and I think that we talked a minute ago about the government's definition of a good life, that you have a death
Yep.
that's according to your wishes. But I also have a different definition of good life, a good death. A good death is a death that allows you to connect, to be compassionate with the people who come to you, to ask forgiveness and to grant forgiveness to people who ask you for that, to connect with people that you have not talked to for a while and kind of heal that relationship. Attending to your relationships makes a good death. as
Mm.
well as having your wishes carried out. So those are the kinds of things that seem important to me: empathy, compassion, forgiveness,
Yeah,
connection.
I've been told, and you're the expert, that when people are dying, the last thing they say is, I should have worked more hours and made more money. And
Yes,
what they do say is, I regret not spending more time with my kids or with
of
my
course.
family.
Right. Sometimes I tell my husband, I'm going to put on your gravestone, I wish I'd been in more committees.
God.
Just to remind him that he shouldn't spend all his time doing good in the world. He should spend some time doing good in his family.
Right.
But yeah, I think those things are really important to think about. And it's a good time to think about it because the baby boom is coming through. The baby boom is reaching the more people in the obituary columns
Yeah, that's me.
were
Yeah.
born in the year of my birth are
Yeah.
dying now because I'm at the leading edge of the baby boom.
Right.
And as they come through the system, they're going to wreck it, as they have wrecked every other system. There's too many of them for the number of mortuaries that we have. There's too many of them for the number of crematoriums that we have. In Japan now, you have to get a room in a hotel to keep the corpse in until there's space in a crematorium, because
Wow.
Japanese cremate, right?
Wow.
And so you see these scenes of people having a casket in a hotel room that's devoted. The hotel is devoted to storing people after they die, with the
Wow.
candles. And how Japanese are very elaborate about their dead, and so there's candles and wreaths and flowers and all this kinds of thing in the
Yep.
room until they 2 or 3
Wow.
weeks until they get a chance to actually cremate the person.
That's
That's going to happen to us.
that's
This whole
amazing.
system is very fragile, and it will be overrun, and it will become extremely expensive. So I
Yeah.
think that you need to think about this early, make arrangements early, pay for
Yep.
things sooner than later, so that you are at the top of the list when this happens.
So, Judy, I watched a 60 Minutes this last weekend that I just want to mention. It was a segment about the Showa Foundation, which I believe Steven Spielberg helped fund, interviewing Holocaust survivors about
Oh,
their experiences. But they've come up with a high tech approach where
oh,
they bring in living Holocaust survivors
uh-huh.
for a week and
Oh,
they ask 2,000 questions.
oh my gosh.
And but the point is that they film them from so many different angles, it creates
Mm-hmm.
a hologram that is
Wow.
completely lifelike. And instead
Wow.
of, you know, people going to a Holocaust museum and hearing a lecture or watching a video, you just ask questions. What
Wow.
happened to you? Who died in which
Right.
concentration? But because they've done the AI and all of those
Right.
questions,
They can answer your questions.
and and so a living Holocaust survivor was who had been filmed because they watched that,
Yeah.
asked himself, like, sing me a song, and
Oh,
he sung a childhood song.
song that he heard in
So you
the
see him
yeah.
live looking at the holographic him because he really wanted
Amazing.
to do this to leave a legacy for the future generations
Well,
to
yeah, and
experience this as people.
they say that virtual reality is an empathy machine.
Hmm.
So when you see somebody talking about their experience of the Holocaust and they were there, you are much more likely to have an empathic
Exactly.
response than if you read about it or if you heard about it on the news. It might cause anxiety, but it doesn't cause empathy. And that's really what we're
It's
looking for.
so insightful of you to say that because I hadn't named it as that, but it's exactly what it is. But I was
Yeah.
thinking, my goodness, as long as, there's electrical circuits and everything else, this man will be immortal
Yeah. Yeah.
and he will be able to sing
Yeah.
his favorite childhood songs
And we'll
forever.
probably all have a chance to do that.
Yeah.
Do you know, if I live another 15 years, which is fairly likely given my family history,
Yep.
I might have a chance to do that. Make
Yep.
a hologram of myself talking about whatever I want to talk about. But
But how
yeah.
about a cheap alternative, which is sitting down with your smartphone or whatever camera with your elderly parents or
Mm-hmm.
grandparents recording their stories?
Yeah, that's such a great idea. And I wish that I had done that with my parents for sure, because there are so many stories now that they told me that I'm beginning to forget the details of. And,
Yep.
a story is all in the details.
Yep.
So it'd be wonderful to have that recorded. And a lot of people who are dying too, there's a huge industry now in doing it for people who are
Oh.
dying.
Oh.
But
Okay.
it would be good to do it when you're not dying.
Right, a
Yeah,
thousand percent. And you can
right.
edit together videos. And then I wanted to tell you that I decided that I want my website to stay up for 20 years so people can benefit from the information up
Right,
on it. And so, for me, that is a great legacy. It's better than a grave site that no one's going to come to
right.
or come once a
Yeah.
year.
For me, I write a personal blog,
Right.
and my family will have that forever. And I think that that is so great because you're writing it in the present, right?
Yes.
You're writing it about what you're thinking about in the present. So I'm trying when I do these things to let people visit my mind,
Yes.
to know what I think and what I feel and what I do around the issues that I'm dealing with. So they have a good, complete picture of me insofar as I can express, express, which is so important to me, that through my blog. And, if you want to see my blog, you can do it by Googling Judy Stevens-Long, and it's the first thing that comes up.
Absolutely. We'll do a blog and we'll put links to all of these great things.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you again for helping me be my mentor, help me with my doctoral program. I was scared that I couldn't do it. And you were like, you can do this. You chunk
Yeah.
it down.
I was right.
You are right.
I was
So we
right.
can help you get through this.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
I'm so grateful to you, and for Fielding was great, and Michael Commons who encouraged me to go there. I want to thank him as
Well, I
well.
felt honored that you were coming to us, and especially that you were coming to
Yeah,
me.
and the
So,
work is going to, keep getting bigger around the world because the issue
absolutely.
of undue influence and brainwashing,
Absolutely.
it's
It's really the topic of the day, isn't it?
it
All this
appears so. It really
conspiracy
does.
theories and
Yep.
weird
I
group.
actually just did a TEDx talk on how can I tell if I've been brainwashed, which
Oh,
I
that's
think
great.
I think should be pretty popular. We'll
Oh, yeah,
see.
that's a very interesting
Because
topic.
I used my story in the Moonies and
Yeah,
all of
of
that and
course.
everything. As we wrap up, my dear, final words that you might like to share.
Okay. Well, one thing is that there's no sense in being afraid of dying because it's going to happen anyway, whether you're afraid of it or not. So you might as well get the details down so that at least when it happens to you, it happens the way that you would want it to happen. And people know what you want, who you are, who you were, and what you've accomplished in your life. Those are the things that you want to happen when
Awesome.
you are when you get ready to go.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And continued good health, and I can't wait to come out to the West Coast to visit.
Oh, yeah. We want to see you real soon.
Love it. Thanks so
Bye
much.
bye.
Okay.
Thanks you. Thank
Okay.
you. I really enjoyed it and appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.